They say that some secrets in Hollywood are meant to stay buried forever. But in the autumn of 2025, inside a small dimly lit room in Beverly Hills, Angie Dickinson, once hailed as the last muse of Hollywood's golden age, broke her silence after more than half a century. She sat before the camera of CBS Sunday Morning holding an old gold watch with a scratched face, its hands frozen at 2:17, the exact time Frank Sinatra died. When the host asked, "You once said there was a man who made you feel both happiness and fear. Who was he?" Angie gazed off into the distance, her voice so soft the microphone had to be turned up. Frank Sinatra." Then she said the sentence that left the entire studio in stunned silence. "Frank once promised to marry me, but I refused. Not because I didn't love him, but because I was afraid of his violent temper and his endless affairs." It was the first and also the last confession of a woman who had once walked through Hollywood's brightest lights, only to fall into a shadow that only she truly understood. From the moment Angie spoke his name, the air in the studio seemed to thicken. Everyone understood that the name Frank Sinatra did not simply evoke music. It carried the weight of power, fear, and the kinds of secrets Hollywood had never dared to put into words. Because Frank Sinatra was more than just a singer. By the late 1940s, Frank Sinatra wasn't merely America's most famous entertainer. He was a shadowy force that even the FBI watched with caution. The Bureau's classified files on Sinatra stretched over 2,000 pages, filled with wiretaps, suspicious trips to Las Vegas and Havana, and parties crowded with men the U.S. government considered dangerous. One report stated plainly, "Subject maintains close personal ties with Sam Giancana, the Chicago crime boss." Sam Giancana was no ordinary gangster. He was the cold, calculating head of America's mafia empire. The man who controlled gambling, money laundering, and allegedly had direct ties to the Kennedy political machine. Many believe Giancana helped John F. Kennedy secure victory in Illinois in 1960. And the bridge connecting the boss and the president was none other than Frank Sinatra, Hollywood's biggest star, trusted by both worlds. On stage, Frank was mesmerizing. Off stage, he was the crucial link in a network where fame, politics, and organized crime blended into one dark symphony. Witnesses recalled that during his nightly shows at the Sands Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, the front rows were always filled with men in gray suits, silent, unsmiling, never applauding. They weren't there to enjoy the music. They were there to send a message to the city. "Frank is speaking on our behalf." After each performance, Sinatra never exited through the artist's door. He slipped quietly out the back into a black Cadillac with tinted windows and vanished into the night. Only a handful knew where he went: to desert villas, to all-night gatherings where whiskey flowed like water, and million-dollar deals were sealed with a glance between a singer, a politician, and a mob boss. Those who worked at the Sands said that every time the chairman walked in, Vegas changed its heartbeat. Journalist Clifford James, I first to write about the Rat Pack, once said Frank didn't need bodyguards. The whole city was his protection. Local authorities, police, even movie producers learned one rule: never cross Sinatra. One phone call from him could make a newspaper disappear, a director lose his job, or a singer vanish from every marquee overnight. This was power, not born from a gun, but from a voice and from the men who stood behind it. Sinatra sang for President Roosevelt, drank with Kennedy, and dined with mafia legends like Lucky Luciano and Gianna. He was the bridge between two worlds where Hollywood's bright lights illuminated tables crowded with secret handshakes. For Angie Dickinson, stepping into Frank's world meant stepping into that labyrinth, one built from charm and danger where every exit led back into shadow. Frank could make a headline vanish, get a director fired, or erase a person's name from the industry within 24 hours, Angie recalled in her 2025 interview. "That's when I realized he wasn't just a singer. He was a force. And when a man like that loves you, love isn't a choice. It's an order." At first, Angie thought his attention was just flattery from a powerful man. But soon she noticed the truth behind the gifts and compliments, the eyes watching her every move. When she left the hotel, a gray Cadillac always followed. At parties, there was always someone standing silently in the corner. I didn't know who they were, she said. But when I looked back, they'd meet my gaze and smile that cold smile. Sinatra had drawn Angie into a world the press would never dare, to enter a world where everything was preordained. Who would rise? Who would fall? Who would love? And who would be loved to death? And in that game, Angie was merely a small pawn on the chessboard of a man the FBI described in just 2 words: highly dangerous. And it was within that underworld where fame, money, and fear intertwined that Frank Sinatra first met Angie Dickinson. Their meeting wasn't a twist of fate, it was the design of power itself. Because when a man like Sinatra sets his eyes on someone, love never begins as a choice, but as a command. Angie Dickinson first met Frank Sinatra on a warm July night in 1960 at an exclusive entertainment industry party held at the Sands Hotel and Casino, the famed playground of the Rat Pack. She was 29 at the time, fresh from her breakout role in Rio Bravo. While he was already the undisputed king of Las Vegas, Frank entered the room dressed in a white suit, cigarette between his fingers, a half-smile on his lips, and an aura that made the entire crowd fall silent. When his eyes met Angie's, he stopped, walked straight toward her, and said in that husky, unmistakable voice, "I've heard about you, but no one told me your eyes were this sad." It sounded like casual flirtation, but for Frank, it was a declaration of ownership. 2 days later at Angie's small apartment in Los Angeles, a delivery arrived, a bouquet of white orchids and a short note from Frank. "The man who can't sleep because of you." She knew exactly what it meant. In Las Vegas, someone refused Sinatra. Those who tried either vanished from performance schedules or suddenly lost their studio contracts. When Frank set his sights on someone, that person no longer had a choice. He never had to say "I love you," Angie recalled years later. "He just looked at me and the whole room understood I already belonged to him." From that moment, her life took a sharp turn. Sinatra began to surround her with a kind of affection that was both intoxicating and suffocating. Every morning, the mailman delivered a new gift: a Swiss watch, a Dior dress, a Tiffany necklace. Every evening, the phone rang at the exact same time. "Where are you? Who are you with? Why? Wasn't I told you'd be at that club tonight?" Frank had people tracking her every move, not for protection, but to make sure she stayed exactly where he wanted. Once, while Angie was dining with a friend, a waiter approached carrying a silver tray. With a telephone, a call from Mr. Sinatra. On the other end, Frank's voice was calm. "Lo, the wine you're drinking, red or white?" It was a harmless question, yet it chilled her to the bone. She realized then that every step she took was being watched. What began as attention slowly turned into possession. He wanted me to be exactly where he wanted, exactly when he wanted. Angie said, "I couldn't accept a role without his approval, couldn't attend a party unless my name appeared on his guest list. And if I smiled at another man too long, that man would simply disappear." To the world, it looked like a glamorous romance between a rising actress and a music legend. But to Angie Dickinson, it was the beginning of something darker, a relationship where love and control were inseparable, and admiration quickly turned into a gilded cage with no exit. As time passed, Angie realized that Frank's love was no longer protection. It was fear disguised as affection. Behind the lavish gifts and tender words was a man who couldn't bear losing control. And it was then that she understood behind the polished charm of a gentleman, Frank Sinatra was a man fueled by rage, a ticking bomb, waiting for a spark. Outwardly, Sinatra was the perfect gentleman, refined, witty, and impossibly charming. But behind the stage lights, he was a live wire, unpredictable and volatile. People whispered stories about how he could be laughing one moment, and in the next, his expression would darken, his voice drop, and the entire room would freeze. He once hurled a glass at a reporter who mentioned Ava Gardner, his former lover. He punched a hotel manager at the Sands for serving the wrong drink. Jack Daniels on the rocks, no lemon, no soda. One small mistake could draw blood because Sinatra was not only temperamental, but used to absolute obedience. Those who worked for him lived by unwritten rules. Don't make eye contact too long, never speak unless spoken to, and never under any circumstances mention the women. According to FBI records spanning thousands of pages, Sinatra had over 30 documented public altercations, hotel rampages, drunken fights, insults to police officers, even once throwing a drink in a journalist's face. Before he was a legend, he was arrested in 1938 for seduction and breach of promise to marry stemming from a scandal with a young woman in New Jersey. The charges were dropped, but that mugshot, slicked back hair, youthful face, and defiant eyes remained a reminder that his fame was built not on purity, but on chaos. Angie Dickinson knew it better than anyone. "He never hit me," she said. But Frank's anger was something you could feel in the air, thick, heavy, like the whole room might explode if you said the wrong thing. She remembered him smashing a whiskey glass against the wall when someone mentioned Ava Gardner's name. Another time, he shattered a telephone because a director called too late at night. "Frank could love you with all his heart," Angie said, "but he could also terrify you without saying a word." She recalled one night at La Scala in Beverly Hills dining with director Howard Hawks, the man who had given her her big break with Rio Bravo. Sinatra walked in, and the restaurant fell silent. He went straight to their table, placed a hand on the back of Angie's chair, and said in a low, measured tone, "I thought you liked red wine. Didn't expect to see you drinking white with someone else." It sounded harmless, but the temperature in the room dropped. Hawks forced a smile. "We're just talking business, Frank." Sinatra smirked. "What kind of business needs candlelight?" Then he turned and left, leaving the room frozen in silence. The next morning, Warner Brothers called Hawks' office. Angie's newly signed project was canceled. His name disappeared from the studio's director roster. No explanation was given, and none was needed. Everyone in the industry understood it was the Sinatra effect. When Frank wanted someone gone, a single phone call was enough. That was the moment Angie understood her place in his world. Not as a partner, not even as a lover, but as something he possessed. And when a man powerful enough to make Hollywood tremble claims you as his own, love ceases to be happiness. It becomes captivity. The longer she stayed, the more Angie felt the invisible eyes on not only Frank's men, but others in suits lurking in the shadows. Because when love intertwines with the underworld, it stops being just an affair between two people. It becomes a matter of surveillance, one that even the FBI begins to notice. When Angie Dickinson began appearing publicly alongside Frank Sinatra, it wasn't just Hollywood that buzzed. Even the FBI started paying attention. Among the thousands of classified pages the Bureau kept on Frank, there was one short but chilling note. A television actress is in a close relationship with an intermediary figure in the Las Vegas crime network. The report didn't name her, but every detail, her age, background, residence, and social circle, perfectly matched Angie Dickinson. To the FBI, Sinatra wasn't merely a singer. He was believed to be the link between mafia bosses like Sam Giannana and Lucky Luciano, and America's political and financial elite. For Angie, becoming Sinatra's woman meant being pulled into the eye of a storm, a world where everything was controlled by money, passion, and fear. A former FBI agent revealed in an anonymous 1987 interview she was trapped between two worlds, Hollywood and the mob, and she couldn't escape because Sinatra held both keys. One opened glory, the other opened hell. She only had to choose wrong once and she'd lose everything. That statement perfectly captured Angie's position. Then too famous to hide, too fragile to fight back, and too entangled to walk away. By late 1961, strange things began happening around her. She received eerie phone calls at midnight. No greeting, no voice, just slow, heavy breathing. I asked, "Who's there?" But there was only silence. I heard a cigarette being lit. Then the line went dead. After a few times, she understood it wasn't a prank. It was a message. "We know where you are. We know what you're doing." People on her film sets noticed she'd changed jumpy, withdrawn, constantly on edge. She changed phone numbers often, always pulled her curtains shut, never stayed alone in hotels. A close friend recalled some nights she called me over just to sit with her. She said she heard footsteps in the hallway, but when she opened the door, no one was there. I asked if Frank sent someone to follow her. She just shook her head and said, I don't know, but they know everything about me. One night, Angie saw a gray Cadillac parked across her street engine off two men in dark suits inside. They stayed all night, not smoking, not moving. At dawn, the car disappeared, only to return the next night. The third time she walked outside toward it. The engine started quietly and it drove away. No one knew who they were, but she knew exactly what that meant. Frank knows where I am, who I'm with, she said. He doesn't have to ask. His eyes are everywhere. That was the moment Angie realized Sinatra's love was no longer the glamorous romance the world imagined. It had become an invisible web of control spun from the threads of underground power. In that world, a woman wasn't just a lover, she was property. And when property tried to leave, the world moved to keep her in place. She lived in fear, but also in silence. In Hollywood, no one dared speak about Frank Sinatra. The press knew, but never printed. Directors knew, but looked away. Angie, caught in the middle, survived only by pretending she knew nothing. Once you fell under Frank's shadow, silence was your only safety. As their relationship dragged on, the line between passion and fear blurred, until one incident in Rome shattered everything. In 1996, Sinatra was in Rome filming Von Ryan's Express, a big comeback project after years of scandals. At the same time, Italian tabloids exploded with photos of him on a yacht with 19-year-old singer Claudia Mai along the Amalfi Coast. In the pictures, Frank was laughing his arm around the young girl's shoulders as if the past no longer existed. The rumors reached America fast. In Los Angeles, Angie watched the news in silence. A friend recalled she didn't say a word. She just poured another drink and stared at his face on the screen. Days later, Angie flew to Rome. No call, no letter, just a suitcase and an old photo of the two of them. That evening, she arrived at the Excelsior Hotel where Sinatra's crew was staying. The receptionist said she went straight to the 7th floor, Suite 712, and demanded to see Mr. Sinatra immediately. A room service waiter later recalled, "When I knocked, she was standing right in front of him. He wore an unbuttoned shirt, a cigarette burning on the table." Angie asked hoarsely, "Do you have someone else now?" Sinatra didn't flinch. He looked straight at her and said slowly, "Don't make me choose." That was the spark. From the hallway, people heard shouting, glass shattering Sinatra's furious voice. "No one walks away from me first." The next morning, Angie left the hotel pale-faced, mascara smeared. She walked alone down Via Vento under the Roman sun, a broken angel in high heels. A photographer caught the moment. La Repubblica ran the photo with the headline, "The Angel Leaves the King." Hours later, every copy was recalled. The editor was suspended. The journalist fired. The photographer vanished. Rumor had it a call from America buried the story overnight. After Rome, Angie vanished for nearly a year. The press claimed she was vacationing in Europe, but she was hiding. A friend said she changed her name, rented a tiny apartment in Paris, and refused to answer the phone. Every knock on the door made her jump. She rarely went outside. In one unsent letter, she wrote, "I love him, but I'm afraid being near him is standing on the edge of a cliff." Just when she thought she'd escaped, Frank found her again. In 1964, he performed at Carnegie Hall in New York. After the concert, he sent someone to bring Angie backstage. She hesitated, but went. The room glowed with gold light and the scent of whiskey. Before the entire band, Frank Sinatra, the man who never knelt for anyone, went down on one knee. In his hand was a black velvet box with a 5-carat diamond ring. His voice trembled. "I've loved you for 4 years. Let me do the right thing." The room froze. Angie looked at him through tears and whispered, "If I say yes, I'll stop being me." Frank stood silent, his eyes gone cold. He poured a glass of whiskey and hurled it against the wall, glass shattering like the end of their 4-year storm. "If I said yes, I would have disappeared," Angie said years later. "Frank could love you with all his heart, but his love was something that made you lose yourself." From then on, marriage was never spoken of again. Frank sank deeper into rage and alcohol. Angie, scarred and haunted, chose silence. "I left because I wanted to live," she said. He stayed with his power, his fame, and the loneliness he mistook for glory. Those who knew them said Sinatra was never the same. He lost a piece of light in his eyes while Angie, though free, carried the wound forever. Because in Hollywood, to love Frank Sinatra was to sign a contract with both angels and demons. After Angie left, Frank didn't just lose her, he lost control. His friends called it the King's dark years. He still sang like no one else, but inside he was ashes. Dean Martin once said, "When Frank hurts, the whole world feels it." He drank more than ever. Every night was a blur of whiskey and regret. His assistant said he'd sit alone for hours in the dark, playing Angel Eyes, the song he sang to Angie the night they met. Sometimes he'd smash glasses or even a TV if he heard her name on the news. When asked why, he said coldly, "You ever loved someone I didn't? I just learned how to keep them." That line was a confession Frank Sinatra didn't know how to love without owning. In 1966, fate brought them together once more at Sinatra's birthday party in Palm Springs, hosted by Dean Martin. Angie appeared thinner, quieter, her beauty now tinged with melancholy. When Strangers in the Night began to play, Frank approached her and handed her a folded note handwritten lyrics to All the Way ending with "For a who never stopped being my angel." Angie read it, looked up and said softly, "You don't need an angel. Frank, you need forgiveness." He smiled sadly. "I loved you the wrong way, but it was the only way I knew." That was their last private conversation. 3 months later, Frank married Mia Farrow, 30 years his junior. On their wedding night in Las Vegas, a violent storm broke out, tearing down the neon sign of the Sands Hotel, where he had first met Angie. The letter S fell off, leaving only hotel. The local paper asked, "An omen for the king?" Dean Martin only muttered, "I don't believe in omens, but I know Frank never forgot her." As time passed, Frank Sinatra's aura gradually faded. Yet, the name Angie Dickinson continued to haunt him like a ghost that wouldn't let go. When fame, money, and lavish parties had all ebbed away, what remained was an old man sitting alone in an empty room, face to face with the memory of the one woman he truly loved and lost forever. After 60, Frank Sinatra was no longer the vibrant icon of the 1950s. He retreated to his villa in Palm Springs, walled in by high fences and discreet rows of trees. No more parties, no Vegas lights, only music from an old record player and heavy darkness in a room thick with cigarette smoke. Frank didn't grow old. He shrank, an old friend said. The older he got, the quieter he became, and the more he drank alone. A housekeeper recalled it that there was only one photograph in his living room, a picture of Angie taken in Vegas in 1960. Each year on the same day, bouquet of white orchids appeared at a Dickinson's door in California with no card. Angie knew who sent them, but she never called back. "I've said everything there is to say," she shared in a 2025 interview. "The rest is silence." Frank kept writing letters but never mailed them. In one dated 1980, he wrote, "I kept every promise except the one I made to you." The words trembled. The ink blurred as if the man who once made the world swoon could now only speak to the past. Family members said that every night Frank would sit before that photograph talking to the angel in the frame, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. He lived inside his own memories, his daughter once admitted. Every time Dad looked at that picture, he changed gentler, weaker, more real. In May 1998, Frank Sinatra died at the age of 82. That night, when CNN announced Frank Sinatra has died in Santa Barbara, Angie Dickinson sat alone by the window. As the anchor read the news, the gold watch Frank had given her in 1960. "It's back engraved to my angel." FS suddenly stopped at exactly 2 a.m. Angie looked down, said nothing, and simply smiled. "I think he said goodbye." She never changed the battery in that watch. From that day on, it has remained still. The way time stood still for two people who had lived through a love that could never be named. Sinatra's final years were the tragedy of a man who once had everything: fame, fortune, love, but could not hold on to himself. Behind luxurious walls, people saw an aging legend sitting alone with an empty glass, and the sad songs he himself had sung. Frank lived the way he sang, his friends said. It's just that his My Way was too lonely, too costly. And when Angie heard that song again, she simply closed her eyes. He loved me the wrong way, she said. But perhaps that was the only way Frank Sinatra knew how to love. Half a century later, when the stage lights had long gone dark and secrets seemed safely buried, Angie Dickinson finally dared to say what Hollywood always avoided. In a small room in Beverly Hills, she didn't just recount an affair. She pulled back the glittering curtain so the world could see the true Frank Sinatra, a musical legend, but also a man devoured by his own power, passions, and shadows. In October 2025, in a small room at the Beverly Hilton in Beverly Hills, where the afternoon sun filtered through pale gold curtains, Angie Dickinson, 93, sat before the cameras of CBS Sunday Morning for a special interview. On the table lay Sinatra's old gold watch, its hands still frozen at 2:17, the moment he died in 1998. Slowly, she spoke of years that Hollywood had once treated as taboo, her thin hands trembling, her eyes still sharp as if she were staring straight into the past. When the host journalist Anthony Mason asked, "If you could go back, would you choose to love him again?" Angie was silent for a few seconds, took a deep breath, then smiled softly. "Frank once promised to marry me," she said, "but I refused. Not because I didn't love him, but because I was afraid." The studio fell quiet, and in the voice of the silver-haired woman, the world heard not just the fear of someone who once stood beside a legend, but the testimony of those who lived within Frank Sinatra's orbit, where light and shadow always intertwined. Frank Sinatra, the man the world adored, who could captivate a room with a single smile, was also the man who made those who loved him tremble. He was talented and magnetic, but also domineering, hot-tempered, and so hungry for control that he left others gasping for air. "He could make you feel like the only person in the world," Angie said, "but he could also shatter you with a single look." She did not sugarcoat the past. She spoke plainly. Frank was a man with two faces, one for the world and one only the inner circle knew. In public, he was the elegant gentleman in a black tuxedo, with a husky voice and smoldering gaze. Behind the curtain, he was quick to anger, dependent on alcohol, riven with contradictions, and fueled by storms that only liquor and power could quell. Frank wanted love, she said, but he didn't know how to love without possessing. Angie said that during the years they were together, she saw both the angel and the demon in him. He could tenderly cook her breakfast, then that same evening hurl a glass because he'd seen her talking to another man. He could call her in the middle of the night just to say, "I miss you," and also send people to watch her to make sure she wasn't seeing anyone while he was away. Frank was complicated, she said, slow and steady. He wanted to be loved, but he was afraid of being left, and that made him destroy everything he touched. Then she looked straight into the camera, her eyes shimmering, not just with age. "I don't regret loving him. I only regret letting him define love for me." She said that in loving Frank, she had lived most truthfully with herself. It was a love both radiant and terrifying, a love that cost her career, reputation, and at times, even her peace. But she never felt remorse. "I was young then, reckless, and I loved him with everything I had." She laughed softly. "I knew he had terrible sides, jealousy, rage, possessiveness, dark connections, but I chose to stay, at least until I could no longer breathe inside that love." Her answer left the crew in silence. No one expected a 93-year-old woman after so many years of secrecy to speak of Frank Sinatra, with eyes so full of pain and gentleness. Clearly inside her, fear and love still coexisted, just as Frank always lived between light and shadow. Days after the taping, Angie was found asleep by the window, morning light falling across her serene face. The gold watch was still in her hand, its hand still at 2:17. On the table lay a hastily written note in a trembling hand. "I loved him, not because he was Franken Sinatra, but because with him I felt alive." The media called it the latest farewell in Hollywood history. But those who understood knew it wasn't a goodbye. It was a release. Frank Sinatra, the man who made the whole world sing along, yet whom few dared to truly look in the eye. From immortal love songs to drunken nights of violence, from kisses in dark rooms to phone calls that got journalists fired together, these formed his truest portrait. a great genius and a lonely man who could not love without hurting someone. Angie Dickinson, the last woman brave enough to speak his name, wasn't telling her story to assign blame. She wanted the world to know that behind the legend was a real person. Dazzling, reckless, lonely, and unfathomably deep. "Frank loved me the wrong way," she said, but perhaps that was the only way he knew how to love. When My Way played at the end of the interview, Angie closed her eyes. Perhaps in that moment she heard his voice echoing husky, warm, proud, and lonely like a soul not yet ready to leave this world. And in the dim light of a small Beverly Hills room, Frank Sinatra's last woman closed the story. Hollywood once wanted to forget with a small smile and a whisper, "At last, I've said it." If you think that behind Hollywood's glamour lie only romantic love stories, then the story of Angie Dickinson and Frank Sinatra proves the opposite. Sometimes behind timeless love songs are wounds that never heal. Now that the story has been told, while Frank's gold watch still rests silently on Angie's wrist, like a quiet witness, one question remains. Was it truly love or just possession disguised as passion? What do you think? If it were you, would you dare to love someone like Frank Sinatra, knowing that such love could cost you yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to hear more untold Hollywood stories where light and shadow always coexist, and where even the most perfect legends eventually reveal their humanity.